Okay, very good. Thank you. So we're coming up on Passover at the end of the month. Holy Week, I think. Palm Sunday is what, March 26th?
28th.
28th, yeah.
28th. Okay. And so Holy Week and Passover coincide. Easter is April, help me out here, 5th?
4th.
4th. Okay. And Passover is ending at that point also. And so as usual, except in the Orthodox Christian traditions, Passover and Easter often coincide, usually. And we thought today we'd talk about freedom. Passover is classically about freedom, and as I understand it, there is significance to talking about freedom in relation to Easter also. So we're going to talk about our traditions and freedom this morning, and I am going to access my notes. I'm going to, I think, go first because I think that what Judaism has to say about freedom flows into what Christians have to say about freedom at Easter. Okay. So Passover derives from the narrative in the book of Exodus of the Israelites. In Genesis, we see the Israelites following Joseph into Egypt and settling there and being allotted a portion of Egyptian territory where their occupation as herders and well, out here we'd call them ranchers, actually, won't get in the way of or offend Egyptians who, according to the text, have some opposition to this. And after Jacob dies at the end of the book of Genesis, we flash forward about 400 years to see that the Israelites have grown very numerous, and the Egyptian government doesn't quite know what to do about it, and they decide to enslave the Israelites lest they upset the government and the economy. And we see the Israelites have been enslaved. Moses is born, flees into exile, which is an interesting story in itself, but not exactly relevant to what we're doing today. And he returns at God's command to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And we have the narrative of Moses and his brother Aaron trying to persuade Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. When that doesn't happen, God brings 10 plagues upon Egypt, and Pharaoh lets the Israelites go and wavers, pursues the Israelites. The Israelites cross the Reed Sea on dry land, and once they have escaped, God causes the water to close over the pursuing Egyptian army. That's the basic outline of the story. We talk a lot about freedom when we are observing Passover, and freedom, to me, when one talks about freedom, there's freedom from something and freedom to do something. In this case, obviously, freedom from slavery. And there's a lot of emphasis put on that. There is also freedom from vulnerability. And there is a portion of a passage from Deuteronomy, which I'll read in a moment, that emphasizes that when we're talking about freedom, it's not merely what happened in the Exodus narrative, it's what happened to the Israelites before the Exodus, before even coming to Egypt. And it's also a reflection of Jewish history since the Exodus from Egypt, which is possibly something like 3,500 years ago or more, because the Jewish people has been in a condition of being a people subject to the whims of non-Jewish governments for very often through its history, and that vulnerability continues until today. There's also freedom to do something, and a part of what Moses and Aaron say to Pharaoh is, "Let our people go, so that we can go and worship God appropriately, something that we cannot do here in Egypt." And one can deduce all sorts of reasons as to why the Israelites couldn't worship God properly in Egypt. One of which is the damage to morale and the possible loosening of connection between the Israelites and God, when the Israelites didn't feel free to express themselves in prayer and in worship. Another is a tie to place, so that outside the land of Israel, now this is a later overlay. Outside of Israel, it was difficult to worship God in a foreign land. We get this. I was taught this word in seminary, and those of you who've been to seminary probably have heard this word too. Henotheism, a connection with God associated with a place. You see this, for example, in the narrative of King David when he was fleeing from Saul, and he says, "I'm about to step over the border into a non-Israelite land, and the God I worship does not have control outside this border." That's henotheism. Okay. Freedom to govern ourselves, and freedom to shape our own narrative rather than having it shaped for us. These are ongoing concerns for Jews, certainly, and for other people as well. When we observe Passover, one of the most striking observances, and I think many of you have participated in this, is the Seder, the dinner with liturgy, and the liturgy is recited in a particular order, and the word Seder actually means order. Not as in ordering someone around, but things come in a certain order. So one of the passages that we read in the Seder is from Deuteronomy, referring to bringing an offering to the temple. "You shall then recite as follows before Adonai your God. My father was a fugitive Aramaean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to Adonai, the God of our fathers, and Adonai heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. Adonai freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, Adonai, have given me. You shall leave it before Adonai your God and bow low before Adonai your God, and you shall enjoy, together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst, all the bounty that Adonai your God has bestowed upon you and your household. That's the quote from Deuteronomy. Another phrase in the Seder service, right at about this point where we recite from Deuteronomy, is a series of opposites saying that we have come from here and gone to there. And one of those is from disgrace to dignity, which in a word sums up both these freedom from aspects and freedom to aspects. The Seder service, as those of you who've attended one probably know, involves some symbols of oppression and freedom expressed through different kinds of food. It involves the praise of God, including the selection of psalms of praise that we find in the Bible from, I think it's 113 through 118. Right. And a lot of feasting and song. Oh, I got a thumbs up on my numbers of psalms from Ken, who knows a great deal about that subject. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. The Seder, by the way, personally, it's my favorite meal of the year. I like all the symbolism, the ritual, the music, and one gathers in normal times with family and friends, and it's really a major observance. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to any one of my Christian colleagues who would like to speak up first.
We are so well organized. In the Lutheran confession, as in what is normally frequently used for a public confession at the beginning of worship, we have these words, that we are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. This comes out of the biblical New Testament, and Paul works this out in Romans in particular, that sin is a kind of slavery, that sin enslaves us. And it is by Jesus' death and resurrection that we are assured of the forgiveness, of the freedom from that sin, and also from the captivity of hell and death, released to eternal life. Easter is Jesus' resurrection. So that, in a nutshell, is Easter freedom. We are free from sin and death. When we pay attention to the overlay, the timing with Passover, then we're of course reminded that the freedom from sin then takes us into talking about freedom from oppression within our human communities. But the Christian focus is very much on freedom from sin and death to eternal life. All right. Now, I spoke up at a moment where I didn't have a lot of background noise from the furnace people. I'm going to rely on my colleagues to take it the rest of the way.
So I think that's my cue. Yes, all that and more. The Passover story as received in Second Temple Judaism forms an important core of how early Christians understood their experience of Jesus, particularly his death and resurrection, and passed that framework for understanding Jesus onto their successors, even as Christianity diverged quickly from Second Temple Judaism, and then Judaism went through its own tumult during the Roman Jewish Wars. Christianity had already begun to take that in its own peculiar direction, the Passover story. For us, the story then, for us Christians, the story ceases to be very much about ethnicity or nation in the conventional sense, although we preserve those aspects of the story from Judaism in our own way. We tend to run with a very broadly spiritualized version of the story. And by spiritualized now, I mean on lots of different levels. So we have sacramental interpretations of the Passover, such as the idea that baptism in Christ parallels the crossing of the Red Sea. So by getting baptized, you are leaving spiritual Egypt and entering or starting on the road toward a spiritual promised land. We have moral interpretations, of which Linda just described some, that sin is a kind of slavery. Humans were meant to be free, but by sinning, we enslave ourselves. We lose dominion over ourselves. It's kind of the theology, the Alcoholics Anonymous philosophy of addiction, they took from the Christian understanding of sin. So if you're familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous, you know the idea that alcohol, the bottle, is stronger than us, and it's only by entrusting ourselves to God's care that we can be freed of that slavery. And that's kind of a Christian approach to sin generally. So that in Christ we have, for freedom Christ has set us free. We have the notion of freedom from and freedom for. We are freed from sin, but then freedom for the purpose for which we were created, which is the other side of that moral story, the freedom to love. We were created to love, which can be defined as the free gift of oneself to others. In that sense, we understand God as love. Here, the Trinitarian notion of the Christian notion of the Trinity comes into play, that God was not alone prior to creation, but God is this communion of persons, the gift from the Father to the Son, and the Son returning that gift to the Father, all in the Spirit. So there is a certain sense in which that kind of loving gift among persons is the Christian God. And so Christians in that sense are not just freed from slavery to sin, but freed for participation in that divine love. And then there are also other forms of interpretation. We might read the Exodus story, for example, as the story of the age-old conflict between the prince and the prophet, in this case between Pharaoh and Moses, or between church and state, or religion and state, if you prefer to characterize it that way. But the tendency of the forces of this world to try to take control over it, to dominate it, as opposed to receiving it as a gift from God. And that story in our book, that story ends with this climactic conflict between worldly forces and divine forces for salvation. So it can be also understood as that eschatological, that end of times kind of conflict, even though that appears in some sense in every generation. So this is only a sampling of the ways in which Christians have spiritualized aspects of the Passover story in ways that touch on freedom, that God is freeing us in that sacramental sense. He's freeing us in that moral sense. He's freeing us for love. He's freeing us from domination in order to have dominion in the good sense, the kind of governance over our own bodies and souls, and governance over overall creation, as might be envisioned in the first chapters of Genesis. We are in all those respects being freed, this is in part a restoration of our humanity that is damaged by sin, and in part it is also a transcendence to a new level, a participation in the loving self gift, which is God, and therefore our freedom to give as God gives is also then an elevation to something like participation in the divine life, as our Eastern brothers sometimes call it, divinization, but there's lots of different words that could apply here, but we are looking here for something more than just a restoration of human freedom, but freedom in the sense that that God somehow also practices or enjoys, to be like God in that respect. So all of this has its own subjective or experiential dimension. Ultimately, freedom is a gift to us, as with the Alcoholics Anonymous notion that we started out in slavery, in a sense, slavery to sin, and so freedom, the claiming of freedom begins with gratitude for that gift, and it matures in a kind of graciousness. It matures in that participation in the loving self gift of God. So another way to phrase this from the personalist or experiential dimension would be that movement from gratitude toward graciousness. So I covered a lot of ground there, so forgive me, but I'll pass it off to whoever wants to go next here.
I don't know if Rabbi Tuckman, I have an opportunity to speak at this point.
Oh, please do.
Yes. There's another issue of freedom, and that is freedom of doctrines and dogmas that are fixed, and freedoms that show that expand and evolve. So in much of the white Christian world, and in some segments of our own Jewish world, African slavery was accepted, African American white supremacy was accepted. For people who were of my orientation, there is this struggle for freedom, and the ability to grow and understand rather than be fixed in doctrine and dogma, to me, is part of that freedom. So when a religious tradition says we are disordered, I respond, what is your empirical proof? When someone presents us and defines us for us as something out of an orgiatric Reach for Madness film, I have to question that. When someone defines us as disordered, when someone judges us in that way, because we know those evolutions, that this is not fixed. We see it in many churches. There has been evolution in the Lutheran Church. There has been evolution in segments of the United Methodist Church. There's been you have Paul Moore as quite an exemplar, and Gene Robinson within the Episcopal Church. And so freedom from a perseveration, from a total distortion of who we are, is something that I personally need to challenge. From the notion that we're disordered, from the idea that was expressed by Cardinal O'Connor. I'll give you a contrast of my days in New York as a layperson in New York City, who defined us, claimed that we wanted to recruit people, accused us of being child molesters. Across the river was a very sainted man. You may remember who he was. Bishop Joseph Bogavaro of the Brooklyn Queens Diocese. He reached out and blessed the people from dignity. And as someone working for the someone working at that point for the commission, the New York City Commission on Human Rights, I was invited there. I saw their faith. I saw their belief. I saw the blessings that Bishop Bogavaro had imposed. And freedom from judgments and stereotypes, from definitions from the outside, to me is part of that process. We know, for instance, in our own tradition, at one point, deaf mutes were excluded from being a minyan, part of a quorum of prayer. Then along came Helen Keller, and we understood that to be different. We understand. We understood that there were times in the Catholic Church where science was challenged and yet later embraced. It grew. There was I think was I don't know if it was Pius X who denounced liberalism and democracy. Then along came the Christian democratic parties, the worker priests. There was real evolution in there and an affirmation of liberal democratic values. I think it is high time that we move beyond those stereotypes that are directed against people whose only two sins might be identifying with a gender that was imposed upon them, or for the sin of loving someone differently and loving someone of your own gender and background. The point, we cannot perseverate this way. And I will give you a biblical example, and that is Bilam and his she-ass in Numbers 22. Because Bilam is sent to curse, as you know, the Israelites. He ends up blessing them. But on the route, his she-ass keeps swerving, and it keeps getting pressed. And the perseveration is that Bilam keeps beating the she-ass and beating the she-ass and beating the she-ass and beating the she-ass because it does not see the angel in the road with a fiery sword. Let us please stop judging people by dogma and doctrine and learn who people really are, how we really love, how our relationships have evolved. We have moved from a time of promiscuity that was absolutely horrendous, but even there were loving relationships. Chester Coleman and W.H. Auden, Benjamin Britten and Peter Pears, Gertrude Stein and Alice Toklas. And it's time to let that go. See who we really are, how we really behave, see our own faith, see our own spirituality, and get to meet some of my colleagues, some of the lay people, for instance, at Road of Shalom, and some of my growing number of colleagues who are LGBTQ. Please let us evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Just by way of bringing along what Bert just presented, let me say as well that the stories that we tell at Passover and Easter are so powerful. Well, one of the reasons they are so powerful is that they are always relevant to the present situation. Always. There is always some sort of oppression going on, which requires liberation. People are always sinning, and we try to find a way of redemption from sin. I mean, these are eternal. This isn't something that happened 2,000 years ago or 3,500 years ago. Well, yes, they did happen all that long time ago, but they happen and happen and happen. There is recurrence constantly. And these stories are not only gripping in themselves, but they are always meaningful because they're stories about us. In all this time, human beings, human nature hasn't changed a whole lot. So, this is why Passover and Easter are so meaningful to so many. Other questions, comments?
Rabbi Schumann, you're reminding me of at the so part of my like history as a trans Jew is that I had been a teacher at a Sunday school Hebrew school for many years that I had gone to and was trained at, and then when I wanted to transition and had transitioned in like every other part of my life, they told me that I could not continue teaching there if I was going to transition and be my authentic self in the classroom, and set an example to the kids of that, like, you're holy and valid, and your whole self is, right? And they said no. But the Hillel, because I was still in college, embraced like who I was and said, "Hey, do you want to do queer programming here?" And I was really excited to do so and put together what we called the LGBT Jew IA, the Queer Jews of Hillel. And we did an LGBTQ Passover Seder and called it the Jewish coming out story, like the Exodus and coming out, and how we have to come out sometimes again and again and again and again every year. I mean, sometimes to families that refuse to accept it the first, second, fifth, 10th time. And sometimes just in new situations where people don't know who we are and where we're coming from, and that we're always in that constant state of coming out, and in tension with, as we said earlier, like what the government official, like, who's Pharaoh in our lives, and how do we act as Moses or the Israelites, and when are we sometimes even the Egyptians, like supporting an oppressive government. I hadn't thought about that Seder for a while, and I appreciate you bringing your story, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Mine too. Thank you.
Anyone else? I would like to shift the discussion slightly, staying with the theme of these stories, Jewish and Christian, are eternally relevant. And I want to shift to depictions of them. So what I'm thinking of is the liturgy for the Passover Seder is in a book called Haggadah, which means narration. The Haggadah is, well, let me take a step back. Passover, even among Jews who are not terribly observant, is one of the observances lots and lots of Jews, almost everybody, tries to find a way to observe Passover, to attend a Passover Seder. The Seder book, the Haggadah, is one of the most beloved books in Judaism, and it has been illustrated many, many times by hand and in print. There are people like me who collect Passover Haggadahs, not because the text is different, although lately we've seen a flood of contemporary interpretations, but because the visions of the artists who illustrate them are so various, so expressive, and so meaningful. I would love to be able to share with you some of my favorites. Of course, Zoom doesn't permit, not to mention that I'm in Arizona and my library is in Pennsylvania. So, but there's been fabulous work, and it continues to the present day. From what I understand of Christian-inspired art, the story of Jesus' life and death and resurrection have appeared in art for about 2,000 years, and and this is ongoing. When I visited Israel, it was a joint Presbyterian Jewish trip in November of 2019. And we went to quite a number of Christian shrines, and the diversity of expression of, of artistry was really quite extraordinary. If any of my Christian colleagues or lay people would like to comment on this, I'd be happy to hear about it.
I'm inspired to go in a different direction, which is with music. And in one of the places where I encounter the connection between Passover and resurrection and the freedom that then comes from that is in the hymns that we sing. But I'm not going to sing any of them from you, any of them for you. But that is where I probably first encountered this equivalence. Egypt equals slavery. Christ the Lamb sacrificed for us, equivalent to the Passover lamb. And hidden in Christian language, and in English it's very hidden, we'll get this word Paschal, which literally means Passover. But it's not so hidden in other languages. And so this is my cue to ask those who know Greek and Latin better than I, maybe the Greek in particular. So I think I'm asking Radu if he has anything to share from the Orthodox experience of how the connection between Passover and Easter, and then of course freedom, is portrayed.
Yeah, if you're speaking linguistically in Romanian and Greek, the words do harken back to the Jewish Passover. In the Orthodox tradition, this idea of liberation is primarily about sin and passions, and it's interpreted in a very spiritual way. And I think to the detriment of other ways of interpretation that are more liberation type of theology. And you see in the African American Orthodox communities to have the same emphasis on liberation from slavery, liberation from oppression. But in traditionally Orthodox countries, that really hasn't developed enough. It could have something to do with the fact that at least the rulers they claimed to be the representatives of the faith were people who worked for the faith and as instruments of God. And there's that model of relationship between church and state where they work in symphony with one another. But I think that's a deficit. I think it's something that stands corrected more and more in contemporary political theologies. So, yeah, that would be my comment.
In the chat, Olivia mentioned a Haggadah, a Passover service that was illustrated by a marvelous Polish-American artist named Artur Szyk. SZYK, if you want to look that up, but it comes pronunciation would be Szyk. And he drew his inspiration for his art from Persian miniatures, which, if you've seen them, you know that they are finely detailed. You know, it's the kind of thing where the artist is using a brush with one hair in it.
May I screen share?
I'm sorry?
I could screen share so you can see what we're talking about while you describe. Yeah?
Sure. I mean, these are, this is, Olivia commented, this is one of her favorite Haggadahs. It's one of my favorites also. Szyk has these finely detailed illustrations. And he did a lot of work beyond subjects having to do with Judaism in particular. He did a great, oh, wait a minute, hold it, come down a little bit. There we are, right there.
This one?
The one with the man who is hanging, okay. Szyk, that is a self-portrait. As you can see in the lower right, Szyk is sitting and he's drawing. I think that's probably Haman hanging there. Yes. Vayetalu et Haman al ha'etz. They hanged Haman from the gallows. And Szyk did a lot of work. Again, as Olivia pointed out in the chat, Szyk fled the onslaught of the Holocaust, and in one famous illustration that Olivia has highlighted, a part of the Seder where we talk about people asking questions of particularly children of their parents. Why are you celebrating this festival? And there are 4 answers to give to 4 different kinds of people. Szyk did a lot of what today we would call political cartooning, but it was, as you can see, several notches above what we think of as cartooning. And he depicted the Egyptians in terms of his experience, which was fleeing from Nazi oppression. So you see here that on the left side, you have the wicked person, the Rasha, who is asking, what does the Seder mean to you? And we have a fella here in a Tyrolean hat with a little feather in it and a riding crop, which we could extend, if you like, into a whip, and boots with spurs. Throughout the Haggadah, when dealing with the Egyptians, Szyk scattered swastikas. It's an extraordinary piece of work. You can see how detailed his work was. These, when he made them, when he made these paintings, they weren't big paintings, they were small. He was a miniaturist. Look at the decor framing the images. You see some of the Persian influence here also. it's an extraordinary piece of work. It dates from, I think, the 1940s, perhaps late 30s.
Late 30s, yeah. He had a
Yeah.
lot of trouble getting a whole publishing company
Yeah,
was founded to publish this because nobody else would publish it.
right, right. Extraordinary work, and one of my all-time favorite Haggadahs. Thanks, Olivia, for bringing this up and for sharing the illustrations. Extraordinary work. And in the same way, Christian artists have, and musicians have interpreted and reinterpreted these are foundational stories for Jews and for Christians. And their eternal relevance makes them subjects for ongoing artistic expression. Still happening.
I want to show off one more, which is the bird head Haggadah.
Oh, sure.
So I think the rationale is that a discomfort in general with depicting humans or depicting anything that's real, and depicting things that are not as real, having less of a problem. Is that the impetus for the bird heads?
The idea was in the Ten Commandments, don't make an image in the original text, an engraved image, but that becomes extended to don't make an image of anything, of any animal that is in the sky, on the earth, or in the sea. So what isn't specifically prohibited, perhaps is therefore permitted. So if you draw an image with a human body, but a bird's head, you're not drawing an image of anything that flies or walks around or swims. It's a fantastic animal, so you can draw it. Follow me?
Yeah. There's recently been a pop-up book version of this, which if anybody wants to get me a gift, I would love the pop-up bird's head Haggadah. When is this? 1300. Yeah, oldest surviving illuminated Ashkenazi Passover Haggadah. Which I think it's interesting, also to note, like when we get matzah today, it's this box and it's square like the box is. But naturally they're round because that's the way that you would roll it out with your pin. Roll it out. So.
Yeah, it's called matzah shmura, the round version.
Yeah.
Specifically guarded.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any favorites? I can find stuff.
Well, my all-time favorite, I guess, excuse me, is the David Moss Haggadah. An extraordinary piece of work, contemporary. I don't want to keep our focus here necessarily. Any depictions of the passion narrative or resurrection that some of my colleagues might like to put forward? Any favorites?
Could I speak for a second?
Yes, please.
Sure. Thank you. I'd like to preface what I understand about an artistic expression with what happens in Genesis is the fall of man, and he's expelled from the Garden of Paradise, and an angel that someone referred to earlier, the angel with the flaming sword, to keep man out. And my understanding of freedom would be freedom from death. And as man falls, God tells him that if you were to eat of the apple, you will surely die. He didn't say you're going to go to hell for eternity. He said you will die. And this is understood, I think, more fully of freedom from death in the Eastern churches, there's an icon that shows Jesus pulling Adam and Eve out of death, out of the grave. I thought it was really quite a revealing icon to what the belief, in fact, was. The Christian belief would be that Jesus died and descended into hell or Hades or the grave, Sheol, and he takes Adam and Eve out of mercy and brings them the freedom of life. And that's about all.
I'd like to second that, Joe. Thanks for mentioning that. That is also for me my favorite representation of the resurrection, the Eastern Orthodox icons of the resurrection, which depict Christ stomping down the doors of hell and rescuing those who have been trapped there.
I have the right thing here, right?
Yep, that's the one. And you see that what he has under his feet are the doors, the gates of Hades.
Yeah.
Because in another, so Hades or Sheol being the prison of the dead, not necessarily like hell, like a place of suffering, but well, I hope I can see well here on the screen. The picture is small, but normally the doors of the gates of Hades would be under his feet, and that's what he's resting his feet on, because in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus tells his followers that the gates of Hades will not prevail against them, against the church. And so the church is on the offensive, and he started that. And in the previous icon that you had there, if you looked all around the gates of Hades, there are a lot of locks. Do you see down there in the blue, under the dark blue? There are locks and chains, and there are basically the elements that kept. That's it. So there are the elements that kept humankind prisoner. And now Jesus came when he descended into Hades and broke the bonds that were keeping us under slavery, prisoners under death. And then you see how he's taking up Adam and Eve by their wrists. And that's kind of the iconographic way of using passive voice, as in Adam and Eve are not saving themselves, but they have been saved. So Jesus pulling them by the wrists. And Adam and Eve are representative of the entire humankind.
Wonderful.
That is.
Wow, that's a great piece of work. It really is.
Yeah,
Very
I love this
evocative.
dynamic. Like, you can feel like the wind of it.
Yeah.
Yes, it is very
Tension of the
dynamic.
grave
If you also
refills.
look around Jesus, there's a mandorla shape, and it is darker on the inside, outer on the inside, because God revealed himself to Moses on the mountain in a cloud, so in darkness. And so this darkness is obviously not evil, but is the mystery of God. But at the same time, it's a mystery that radiates light, as in teaches and brings light into the world. So that's why the circles on the inside are darker, the ones on the outside are lighter. And if we could zoom in, you would see that on the feet and hands of Jesus, you should be able to see the marks of the cross. So it is because of his sacrifice. Do you see on his left hand?
Yeah.
Yes.
There. And same thing on his left and right feet.
Yeah.
So it is because of his sacrifice on the cross that he was able to destroy. And then down there, there's a being that is bound up that represents death. So Jesus bound out death.
Oh, I see.
Before that, death was keeping humankind in bondage. But now the things that were keeping us in bondage, you see the keys and the chains and the locks are broken, and it's that death is being imprisoned.
This has all the intensity for me of Schick's illustrations for the Haggadah, loaded with symbols, with dynamism, and a very precise theological outlook. Well, I mean, a theological outlook that's being precisely depicted. Wonderful work.
what are the symbols around Christ's head?
Around Christ's head, as well as the heads of the ones on the left, are the halos, and the halos represent holiness. In the case of Jesus, if you could zoom in, there are some letters, and in Greek, it's o-on. O-on in Greek means the one who is. Now, I hope I'm not doing any blasphemy here, my dear Jewish friends, but you recognize what would be the equivalent in Hebrew?
Yeah, Asher, yeah. In Exodus,
Yes.
Exodus
Moses
chapter
says,
3.
"What name? What is your name?" And God says, and this could be interpreted in many ways, but I am who I am, or quite literally, I will be who I will be.
Mm-hmm. And the one who is the existence in Greek, all of these are included in this. And so it's a claim that the God who spoke to Moses became a human being as Jesus. So actually in Orthodox services, when we end the services, the formula usually is this: the one who is blessed. Right? So the word is comes twice. Once is part of the name, the one who is, or on in Greek. And then the other one. So that's the case of Jesus. In the case of the ones on the left, one of them being John the Baptist, who is considered a prophet, and the other ones being, one is David, and the other one, I don't know which other prophet, and prophets and kings, but basically they would be considered righteous in the Orthodox tradition.
Could be Miriam.
And that's why they have halos. The ones on the right do not have halos because they represent the entire humankind that is not yet in the kingdom, right? You see regular people, shepherds, young, old. The three of them actually, that's a Greek influence, because in Greek philosophy, a symbol for the entire humankind was three men of three different ages. So one is young, middle-aged, and the old. It was basically the way they spoke about as a symbol of the entire humankind.
I'm reminded of a story from the Talmud where somebody is measuring the graves of the ancestors and comes upon the grave of Adam and Eve, and is discouraged from going in there and measuring, because Adam and Eve were made so close to the image of God that to look upon them would be like to look upon God, and agrees to not go and check it out.
That is so beautiful.
I'm really impressed with this icon we're looking at now. I'm really impressed at how Jesus drawing Adam and Eve up is such a reversal of the angel guarding the entrance to Eden. It's really a very powerful symbol.
It's intentional. As a matter of fact, the parallels between Jesus' sacrifice and the Passover lamb are intentional, but also so for example, he is called the Lamb of God by John the Baptist. His blood is put on the wood so that we do not die, just like the blood of the lamb was put on the wood of the doorpost so that we have life. But there's the reference to the story of Eden, because Jesus is crucified on Golgotha, the place of the skull, where, if I understand correctly, according to tradition, Adam was buried.
Adam was buried in quite a number of places in Jewish tradition.
At least his skull was buried there. What would be some other places?
Who knows?
Is one of them Golgotha in Jerusalem?
I really haven't gotten into that, so I don't know.
Anyway, that's the Christian reading, and then that's the Christian reading, and so basically, the fruit of life that people eat, that Adam and Eve were supposed to eat, after a while, after they abstain from the fruit of good and evil, is Jesus's sacrifice. So that would be the Christian way of going back to the story of Eden.
Uh-huh.
One of the ways, like you were saying.
I don't want to conclude before I went into the chat and found that Linda has shared with us what is that and how does John of Damascus relate to it?
It's the first verse of a hymn.
Ah, okay.
And I was saying that it's in our hymns, very often the freedom from sin and Jesus' resurrection are portrayed, and that is one of the ways that Christians learn this connection. So this is one of the older hymns that is in our hymn book. I don't know how many other traditions would carry it, but this theme repeats over and over again in the verses that are sung as for Easter music. I'm going to share one more, and this one comes directly from Martin Luther. But as far as I know, every Christian tradition has Easter hymns that make this connection. Christ is arisen from the grave's dark prison, so let our joy rise full and free. Christ our comfort true will be. Were Christ not arisen, then death were still our prison. Now with him to life restored, we praise the Father of our Lord. So let our joy rise full and free. Christ our comfort true will be.
Thank you. And on that happy note, I think we are going to conclude. And I see that the first Thursday in April is April 1st. And I'm wondering if on April 1st, given that it's during Holy Week, it would be foolish, get it, to
Oh, no.
to try to convene. And I wonder if we might want to go to April 8th instead. What say you?
It doesn't matter to me.
I don't get the joke. Can you explain the joke?
Well,
April Fool's.
April 1st is April Fool's Day.
Oh, you know, I was thinking my head was so in the religious world. I lost the.
One of the most important days in the calendar.
Indeed.
Yes, right, right.
Indeed. I don't know.
Well,
we
except
come
of course
together-
the Eastern Orthodox will have to celebrate April Fool's Day a few weeks later than the rest of us because they're still on the Julian calendar.
Correct.
We're all messed up. I didn't even want to talk about it.
When do you celebrate President's Day?
So
When we
April, I just want to make sure that we're naming this correctly. April 8th is Holy Week for Radu.
I actually don't have access to my calendar, but I would think it's closer to May because it's in the beginning of May that we're celebrating Easter.
Right,
Oh,
right. I think Easter is May 5th for you, is it not?
Probably. We're going to have to go through 7 weeks of vegan fasting. So I'm in denial. I'm not looking up ahead.
Very sensible. So at any rate,
For
what
what
do you
it's worth,
think
I'm not
about?
available on either day, so.
Oh, okay.
I think going to April 8 is wise.
Okay, very good. We will go to April 8th, which has, after all, 5 Thursdays in it, and I will look forward to seeing you all then. April 8th, I should be back in Pennsylvania, and we will conclude. It's a pleasure seeing you all, and one of these days I'll hold this. I'll hold my part of it outside with the with a backdrop of the beautiful mountains to the north of Tucson, and you can all enjoy it with me. So
Good.
in the meantime, I wish you all a very blessed Easter and a beautiful Pesach, a beautiful Passover, and may we all share our blessings with each other.